this is the reason why so many people struggle with food when everything else in their life is also very chaotic, because food becomes the dopamine source, or the relationship with food. The dynamic with food becomes the dopamine source. It becomes the thing that can provide relief, even if it's just for like 3 bites for a few seconds. So as long as your baseline state is dysregulated, you're going to keep reaching for food to regulate. Hello and welcome back to another new episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and today I'm going to talk about something that I believe explains a lot about why people struggle with food in ways that feel completely confusing. And this is what I'm going to be talking about: the difference between satisfaction and stimulation. Because what I hear all the time from people is, I eat, but I never feel satisfied, or I can eat an entire meal and still feel like I just need something after, or I keep eating and I keep looking for the thing that's going to hit the spot, but nothing ever hits the spot. And so many of the people that I hear this from, they think that this has something to do with them, that something is wrong or broken with them, or that they have no self-control, or they're just fundamentally unable to feel satisfied by food. But that is not what's happening at all. What's happening is that their brain is looking for dopamine. And satisfaction and dopamine are not the same thing. They can feel similar. They can overlap, absolutely, but they are neurobiologically different, okay? They are biologically different. And when your brain is running on dopamine, when your brain has been trained to run on dopamine, when it's been trained to chase that hit, that spike, that rush, satisfaction almost becomes impossible to access. Because satisfaction, it's soft, it's quieter. It's like this gentle sense of enoughness, right? Satisfaction is like, it's calm. And dopamine is not. Dopamine is loud. Dopamine is urgent. Dopamine has an edginess and an intensity to it. And so today I want to talk about what happens when dopamine is running the show. Okay, when dopamine is running the show in your life, and why, when that happens, eating doesn't feel satisfying, and why you can end up eating and still feel like something's missing. And ultimately, you're going to realize that this has nothing to do with the food at all, but it's what your brain has learned to crave. It's what your brain has learned to crave from a chemical perspective. And we're going to talk about that. So before we get into it, I'm going to introduce myself to those of you who have never been to this podcast before. Welcome. My name is Alana Kessler, and I am a registered functional dietitian. I have been in this health, this wellness space, mindfulness space for over 2 decades. I have worked clinically in the hospital. I have had my own private practice. I owned a yoga studio for about 10 years where I taught yoga and meditation on a weekly basis. And I've been doing everything. But over the last decade, my passion is helping people really find love with their body, with eating, with weight loss, and achieve weight loss if that is something that you are looking to do in a healthy way, and overcome any kind of emotional or addictive patterns that you might have with food that is stopping you from living your best life, because you deserve to live your best life. And that is what we're trying to do here. We're trying to strip away all of that, anything that's blocking that. So if you're new, welcome. If you are a longtime listener, welcome back, and let's get into it. First, let's talk about what dopamine actually is, because I think there might be some confusion about this, because people talk about dopamine like it's a pleasure chemical, and it definitely has an element of that to it, but People think that dopamine is like you do something enjoyable, your brain releases dopamine, and that's what makes it feel good. That's the narrative around dopamine, but that's not quite right. Because dopamine actually is not about pleasure. It's about anticipation. It's about wanting. It's the chemical that drives you towards something. Okay, it drives you towards something. It's what makes you think, if I just get that thing, I'll feel good. I'll feel better. And here's the key. The key is that dopamine spikes before you get the thing, not after. It spikes in anticipation of the reward. So when you're scrolling through your phone, dopamine isn't spiking when you get the like, right? When you open up your phone because you just posted something before and you want to see how many likes you get, dopamine doesn't spike when you get the likes. It's spiking before you get the likes, when you're about to see it, when you're anticipating that something good might be waiting for you on the other side. And once you actually see the likes, right? So if we relate this to eating, dopamine spikes usually when you're thinking about eating, when you're anticipating the taste of food, when you're imagining how good it's going to taste, how good it's going to feel. But once you actually start eating, once you actually see the red heart come onto your phone, the dopamine drops because the anticipation is over. And if your brain is chasing dopamine, if that's what it's learned to crave, then the actual experience, now let's go back to eating, the actual experience of eating, of engaging with the food, of having the sensation of the food, it's always going to feel like a letdown because it's not giving you the thing your brain is actually looking for, which is the anticipation, right? Your brain isn't looking for satisfaction here. It's looking for the spike, the rush. And, satisfaction, being satisfied, it doesn't provide that. Satisfaction is actually the opposite of anticipation. It's the feeling of having enough. It's the feeling of being satisfied, of inherently it being enough. And when your brain is wired to chase dopamine, enough doesn't register. Okay, that's why when you are driven by dopamine, you end up in this cycle. How does your brain get wired for dopamine to begin with? Okay, so one way is through restriction. Okay, when you restrict food, when you diet, when you skip meals, when you try to control with rigid rules, whether that's like your cliche diet or whether that's even like you have to eat 2 hours after you wake up or intermittent fasting, right? Whatever it is, whatever rule that you've put in, regardless of what the intention was, whether it was supposed to be good for you, you're telling yourself that something is scarce. You're creating scarcity. And scarcity amplifies dopamine. So because your brain knows that food is rare, right? That it might not be available in certain time windows or, food comes with some sort of stakes or some sort of regulations around it. When you finally allow yourself to eat it, the anticipation for it has been massive. The dopamine spike has been huge. And your brain learns that this is what food is supposed to feel like. Right? It's not supposed to feel satisfying. It's not supposed to feel nourishing, but it's supposed to feel high stakes, right? It's supposed to feel urgent. And once your brain learns that, normal eating, or what we call, when we say let's eat like a normal person, eating when you're hungry, stopping when you're full and satisfied, right? It feels boring, right? It doesn't provide the same dopamine hit. So you keep chasing the dopamine hit. You keep looking for food that will give you that spike. Typically, the only foods that do that are the ones that are hyper-palatable, which are the ones that are high in sugar, high in fat, high in salt, right? Have this sort of mouthfeel, or the ones that feel forbidden, right? Whether they're forbidden from memories from past or whatever it is, but your brain has labeled them as forbidden because those foods that are forbidden and hyper-palatable are the ones that create the biggest dopamine response. Okay, so the first way is through restriction. The second way is through stress, right? When you're chronically stressed, your brain is looking for relief, right? When you're chronically under tension, and dopamine provides a temporary relief, right? It gives you that moment of, okay, I'm going to have something good soon. I'm going to feel good soon. Even if that feeling only lasts a few seconds. So if you're tense, if you're tense or you're under stress all the time, right? Even low level stress all the time. If your baseline state is anxious or it's overwhelmed, your brain starts relying on these dopamine hits to get through the day, right? These future projections of feeling better. That's the dopamine working. And food becomes one of the easiest, most accessible sources of getting this immediate feeling of feeling good. You can't control your job. Maybe you can't control the dynamic in your relationship. You can't control what's going on in the world right now. You can't control politics, but you can control what you eat, or at least you can control the decision to eat. And that decision, that moment of anticipation, gives you a hit of dopamine, which makes you feel just for like a millisecond that things are okay. And usually it is just for a millisecond if you think about it. You've built a good life. From the outside, it looks like you have it all together. You eat clean, you work hard, you take care of everyone. But there's this one area that still feels impossible to master, and that is food. You can eat perfectly all day and still end up in the kitchen at night wondering why you keep doing this. You promise yourself you'll start fresh tomorrow, and I know you mean it every single time. But the cycle, it always finds its way back, especially when you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, or when you're just tired of being the one that's holding it all together. And I get it because I lived that way for years. And what I learned is this. The problem, it was never about food. It was the pressure underneath it, the perfectionism, the self-doubt, the part of me that never felt safe and secure to just be me. And that's why I created the sober eating sequence. It's a proven 3-phase method that rewires the emotional patterns and the belief systems driving overeating so you can relax, trust yourself around food, and release weight completely naturally, without force and without obsession. Because when your body feels secure, it lets go. The cravings quiet, the self-punishment, it softens, and food, it stops being the thing that you have to fix. This is not another plan. This isn't another rule book. It's a revolutionary transformation for your nervous system, for your body, and for your identity. So join the sober eating movement today. And then the third thing is the world is designed for us to be in this dopamine web, right? We live in a world that is engineered for it, right? Social media, like I said, the notifications, the infinite scroll, the autoplay, all of it is designed to keep you in a state of anticipation, right? Keep you chasing the next thing. And your brain gets completely used to that. It gets used to operating in a state of constant seeking, right? Of constant chasing for a resolution, chasing for this sense of completion. And when you're in that state of chasing, satisfaction becomes inaccessible because satisfaction requires you to stop chasing. It requires you to make a U-turn and feel enough. But your brain doesn't know how to do that anymore when it's being driven and wired by dopamine. So what does it actually feel like when dopamine is running the show, right? I want to give you some real world examples. So it feels like you eat, but you don't feel done, right? You don't feel like it's complete. Or like you finish a meal and maybe physically you're full, maybe you're even uncomfortably full, but mentally you still feel like you need something. And I'm not talking about a sweet at the end of a meal, like to have dessert. I'm a big fan of finishing a meal with sweet, but I'm talking about you have that sweet and you still don't feel like you're done. You still feel like you need something. So you keep eating because you're chasing a feeling that you haven't found yet. It has nothing to do with hunger. You're looking for that one thing that's going to hit the spot, but nothing does. Because what you're actually looking for, it's not satisfaction, it's more stimulation. You're looking for that spike again, that rush, that moment of, yes, this is it. But the problem is that moment only lasts a second. We often miss it. That first bite might have given it to you, right? Maybe the second even gave it to you. But by the third bite, the fourth bite, the fifth bite, the dopamine is already dropping, right? And you're left chasing something that's already gone. That's why with binges, it's like that. If you think about it, that is the arc of a binge. So you keep eating, you try to get it back, trying to recreate that first moment, but you can't because dopamine doesn't really work that way, right? It spikes and then it drops, and that's its function. That is its function. The more you chase it, the more elusive it becomes. And so examples of this are also like, you start planning your next meal in urgency before you finish the current one. Right? You're eating lunch, you're already thinking about what you're going to have for dinner, but not in like a way because it's like you're trying to think about organizing your day. You're just like, it's because you're looking for that next hit of, you want to get that next hit of anticipation. You're not in the moment. You're not in the moment. And that's dopamine. The current moment isn't providing the dopamine anymore. The current moment is just blah. It's just bland. When dopamine is running the show, it just feels void. It feels empty. It feels like going through the motions. The excitement is in the anticipation, the planning, the imagining, the fantasy. It's not in the actual experience. And I think that one of the most painful parts of this is that, when you're in your life and you're eating food and especially if it's like, and you're with people, you're just not present for it because you're somewhere else, right? And you never get to really experience satisfaction because satisfaction requires the skill of presence, and training your brain to learn how to be satisfied is a skill, right? It's a skill I teach in the sober eating sequence. And you have to train up your body, your behavior, your brain, and your biology and your neurology to be able to do it. Because learning how to appreciate satisfaction is a real job. It's a real skill to learn. But that is the portal to happiness. That's the portal to neutral eating. That's the portal to long-term weight loss. It's the portal to everything. Because when your brain is wired for dopamine, satisfaction feels like nothing, right? It's like how somebody can walk into a museum and look at a painting and see so many things, and one person can look at the same painting and see nothing. Just depends on how your brain is awake, is wired. So we want to wire our brains to see satisfaction as amazing, as not boring. Because when your brain is wired for dopamine, it does see satisfaction as boring. And I don't mean like neutral. It sees satisfaction as like something is missing. Okay, when you're used to chasing dopamine, it sees satisfaction as flatness. And your brain will interpret that as a problem. Right? It thinks something must be wrong. I should be feeling more than this. So it sends you looking for more. Not because you need more, but because your brain doesn't recognize enough as a valid state. It only recognizes chasing. And I think that's why people can eat an entire meal and still feel like they need something more. Still feel like they're not quote unquote full. That's why the hunger fullness thing is a little bit misconstrued, because we really want to feel satisfied. Because ultimately, fullness, even if you're full physically, you don't have the spike anymore. You're still going to feel like you need something. It doesn't matter. So I want to talk about the food. I know we were saying how this isn't about food, but I do want to talk about the role of the hyper-palatable foods, because I do believe that they do play a role in this. Because hyper-palatable foods like high in sugar, fat, salt, foods that are in combinations of fat, sugar, salt that don't exist in nature, these foods are designed to spike dopamine. They're engineered to be maximally rewarding. And food companies in particular know that dopamine drives consumption. Okay, they know that. And so they create foods that trigger the biggest dopamine response possible. Okay, so here's what happens when you eat those foods regularly. It's why people think they're addicted to the foods, but they're not addicted to the quote unquote foods. It's just hyper-palatable foods like this do create the conditions for the dopamine spike cycle to be activated at a very high level. Okay, so here's what happens when you eat these foods regularly. Your brain starts to expect that level of stimulation. It starts to calibrate that as baseline. And then normal food, like food that's not engineered for maximum reward, like just regular food in nature, it doesn't register anymore. It doesn't spike dopamine in the same way. So to your sensory body, it feels unsatisfying. Not because it's not nourishing, not even because it doesn't taste good. It doesn't even have to do with taste. It's just because it's not stimulating enough. It hasn't fired the neurons that these hyper-palatable foods fire. Your brain is looking for the spike, and normal food doesn't provide it. I think that's one of the reasons why people feel so out of control around certain foods. Again, like they're not addictive in the chemical dependency sense, but they're triggering the dopamine response that your brain has learned to crave. And once your brain is chasing that response, everything else will feel like a letdown. Everything else will feel like a letdown. So you keep going back to those foods that provide the spike, and has nothing to do really with your willpower, with your determination, with your discipline. It's really just your brain. It's the way that your brain has gotten wired. This chemical hyper-palatable food thing. It's sort of like, it's a crazy mechanism that has nothing to do with your character. And another thing, and the thing with dopamine is that it has so many different arms, because it has so many different tentacles. Because another thing that happens when dopamine is running the show is, not only are you chasing the anticipation, but you start chasing novelty, because dopamine responds to novelty, like new things, unexpected things, things that are different from what you usually experience. These kind of new things spike dopamine more than familiar things, right? It's the whole kind of like new relationship energy that I talk about with diets, right? Diets are exploiting the dopamine response. It's like newness, it's novelty, it's new energy. Diet culture is a dopamine cycle. Constant recipes, right? Needing to have new recipes, new stuff, right? You're always looking for something that's going to be new, exciting, that's going to be the thing that gets you to be better, that's to feel good. The first time you do it, the first time you start the thing, you start the diet, you get the recipe book, right? You try the first recipe, it's amazing. By the third recipe, you're like, I'm bored. Dopamine doesn't spike the same way. Now it feels like a drag. Now it feels like homework. It feels like pressure, right? And so you move on to the next thing, right? You move on to the next thing, but often not before you potentially, compulsively eat, which we talked about in a last episode, because you're disappointed with this and the dopamine crashed. Novelty spikes dopamine, right? It makes you feel like this is it. But once the novelty wears off, once everything becomes routine, the dopamine drops, you're left feeling the same way you did before, which is disappointed, unsatisfied, and now looking for the next thing. And the cycle continues. And so dopamine it really does just insert itself into so many different ways that you behave and relate to food. Another example is you actually stop tasting your food when dopamine is running the show, right? Like you're eating, but you're not experiencing. You're going through the motions, but the actual sensory experience, the taste, the texture, the temperature, it's not really registering. And again, that's because your brain is focused on the future, on anticipation, not the experience. It's focused on the next bite, the next thing you're going to eat, not the current one. That's why people can eat an entire meal and not remember it. They could eat a whole bag of something and barely taste it. Because once they started eating, the anticipation was over. The experience of eating felt empty. But the anticipation of it was so heightened. And this creates a really painful paradox. And that paradox is you're eating to feel satisfied, but you're not actually experiencing the eating, so you never get the satisfaction. Because the satisfaction comes from the experience, not the anticipation. It comes from actually being able to, like I said, be present with the food, noticing when you've had enough, feeling the sense of fullness, and also deriving pleasure from the enoughness. Like I said, this is something that you have to train your brain to do. Because if you're not doing that, if you're not present for any of that, you're still going to feel like something's missing. Like you ate, but you didn't really eat. And so I want to talk about the emotional component of this, because I do really think there's a reason why some people's brains get wired for dopamine seeking more than others. And it's not just about restriction or hyper-palatable foods or the modern environment. It's also about what food is doing emotionally, right? For a lot of people, food isn't just about, nutrition, fuel, right? For a lot of people, it's not just about pleasure. For a lot of people, food's about emotional regulation. It's a friend. It's a relationship. It's a lever that they use to feel their feelings, to manage their feelings, to feel seen, to process feelings. Maybe not to feel their feelings, but to process feelings. And when you're using food to regulate, to manage emotions, to help you either, avoid or make less intense emotions, you're not eating for satisfaction. You can't really do both. Your nervous system, your brain and your body are not available for satisfaction, because the only thing you're available for is relief. And relief and satisfaction aren't really able to live in the same space together. Relief is about making a bad feeling go away. Satisfaction is about having a need met. And when you're eating for relief, the dopamine spike is what provides that momentary escape from the feeling. It's not about the food itself at all, right? When you're eating for relief, you're just really in it for the anticipation and the momentary escape. It's about the distraction, right? The brief moment where you're not feeling whatever you were feeling before, right? That's the dopamine-driven process, right? You're seeking a spike because it's pulling you out of what your current emotion is. But again, the spike doesn't last, right? So you keep eating, trying to maintain this feeling of escape, right? Trying to stay out of the feeling. This is what a binge is. This is what compulsive eating is. But eventually the dopamine drops and the feeling comes back. And, now you're dealing with the original emotion plus the regret, the shame of eating way more than is comfortable. And that creates more discomfort, which makes you want to escape again, and the cycle continues. This is how the dopamine-driven reaction to, in relationship to food works. So here's something that's really, really crucial to understand is that whether your brain is chasing dopamine or accessing satisfaction depends largely on your baseline state, which is why in my work with people, I work so much on teaching people and coaching people to elevate their baseline state, right? To create a baseline state that's healthy, that has self-worth, self-value, that's able to have capacity for including a lot of different emotional internal experiences into your life, right? Not excluding things, right? Because if your baseline state is stress or overwhelm or anxiety, right? If you're constantly in fight or flight, your brain is going to seek dopamine, right? Your brain is not going to be available for anything else other than dopamine, because dopamine provides a temporary relief from that state. It gives you that moment of, okay, I'm moving towards something good, right? This is intense. This is bad. And it suspends you from it and says, okay, I'm going to just future trip. I'm going to think about the future and it's going to be good. That's the dopamine. Even if that moment is fleeting with whatever activity that you do. In this case, it's food. But if your baseline state can be calm, right? I'm not talking about, you have to be calm all the time. But if your baseline state is a state where you can, have the emotional capacity to maintain a sense of calm, a regulated nervous system, where you feel safe, where you're not in survival mode, you're not in fight or flight, your brain doesn't need to chase dopamine in the same way because it's not trying to escape anything. It's not looking for the solution, the resolution. It's not looking for some sort of completion. It's not looking for relief. It's just being. And in that state of beingness, satisfaction becomes accessible. And you're not looking for food to do something for you. You're just eating, whether it's because you're hungry or whether because, you want it, which is totally fine. You don't only have to eat because you're hungry. You sometimes can eat because, it tastes good and you want to experience it. You want to enjoy. But the most important thing is that in this baseline state, you can feel a sense of enoughness. This is the reason why so many people struggle with food when everything else in their life is also very chaotic, because food becomes the dopamine source, or the relationship with food. The dynamic with food becomes the dopamine source. It becomes the thing that can provide relief, even if it's just for 3 bites for a few seconds. So as long as your baseline state is dysregulated, you're going to keep reaching for food to regulate. All right, so here's what I want you to take away from today's episode. The main thing is, if you're eating and you're never feeling satisfied, it is not about the food, okay? It's likely not about the food at all. It's most likely about the dopamine, that your brain has learned to chase the spike, the rush, the anticipation, and satisfaction, which is subtle, it's quiet, it just doesn't register. It's not registering right now for you. So it just feels like nothing, right? It just feels boring. It feels flat. It feels like nothing. So what's happening is you keep eating and you keep looking for the thing that's going to hit the spot. But what you're looking for is not food. You're not looking for the perfect food that's going to hit the spot, right? What you're really looking for is the ability to access the quiet feeling, the feeling of satisfaction, that feeling of enough, that feeling of I'm good right here, right now. And that feeling, it is your birthright. That feeling is there. You just have to remember how to get back to it. It's just been drowned out by a lot of the noise that's been going on. A lot of the noise of the chasing that's been happening for months, years. It's been drowned out by the constant influx of dopamine hits. it's leaving you depleted, which it 100% is. But here's what I want you to know is that you can change, right? You can learn satisfaction. You can learn satisfaction by learning how to connect with presence, right? To create the conditions in your life and the skills and the self-leadership skills where your nervous system isn't constantly activated, right? Where you can understand that the spike, this future thinking anticipation is not what you need, right? What you actually need is the thing that comes after the chasing stops, which is enough, it being enough. Right? And once you can quiet this chasing energy, you realize that enough is really able to support you. And it's something that's there all the time. It's something that you can plug into and access all the time. So that's it for today. And once again, before we end, I just ask you to, if you love this podcast, to kindly just rate us 5 stars, leave us a written review, because the algorithm loves when it sees that people that are listening just rate the podcast and find value in it, because it says to Apple and Spotify and the other podcast host places that these conversations are helping people. So please give us those reviews and those ratings over there. And if you are watching on YouTube, I'm a big YouTube podcast watcher, please subscribe, because we have a percentage of you, over half actually, that are not yet subscribers. And when you subscribe and when you watch us on YouTube, same thing. YouTube is like, this is good content, and it starts pushing it out to more people, and more people who are sitting at home wondering how to find solutions to what they're struggling with. They will just open their computer and find us. So, and that will be all you. Thanks again. And until next time, I'm Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.